Morning, everyone. Good news, we actually have European measurement standards as of today. IAB Europe actually launched a formal standard for retail media measurement, so it's exciting that we just don't only have it in the US, but also in Europe. And today, I digress, we'll be talking about in-store retail media measurement standards, specifically around measurement. So I work at the IAB. The IAB is a trade organization that we develop standards and best practices with the objective of moving the industry forward. My name is Jeffery Bustos. I'm the Vice President of Measurement, Addressability, and Data at the IAB, where I've been developing standards and best practices for retail media, data clean rooms, and privacy. Today, we're going to be talking about 4 topics. First one is how to align internal KPIs, how to talk about unified measurement, as Quentin had mentioned, how to develop a testing framework, and also understand the limitations and considerations of in-store measurement. So before we can even talk about in-store measurement, we need to understand how we can optimize the in-store environment. And this specifically is done with the collaboration and aligning objectives with merchants. Merchandising represents 15 to 30% of total gross sales, so it's incredibly important as we move in-store to make sure that we are having these conversations with our merchant team. We want to make sure that we have a balance of product selection. We want to make sure that we are looking at packaging, presentation, and pricing and promotions. Retail media is media, but it's also retail. And the objective of the retailer should be, how can I move product off the shelves? And there is tension on this collaboration. So how can we improve collaboration in-store to continue the growth of a healthy in-store ecosystem? First of all, how are we utilizing the space? What is the real estate value, and how are you developing and monetizing that space utilization, either through advertising or product placement? All with the objective of selling more product. How can we balance the revenue and the experience of the store? This is probably the most important part as we move in-store. We don't want retail media to become USA Today or any of these highly advertising, web experiences that we see today. And then within that, how do we maintain visual consistency and marketing creativity? And to achieve these 3 objectives, we can only do that if the retail media teams are working directly with the merchant teams to ensure a cohesive and unified approach. Only then can we truly talk about measurement. So this collaboration will happen through cross-functional teams, looking at how we can share data and analytics, and then finally, how can we look at specific pilot programs and testing, all with the ending in communication and having a feedback loop that is incredibly important as we move forward within retail media. So how do we ensure there's a holistic measurement approach? You can assess, in-store retail media has to be assessed from an omni-channel perspective. As Quentin earlier mentioned, retailers are not just, we're looking at the on-site experience, we're not just looking at the in-store experience, we're looking at the off-site experience. We see retailers such as Walmart, Tesco, Kroger, Carrefour, they're creating omni-channel experiences, and brands are demanding omni-channel measurement to understand the impact of these experiences. And in-store performance is pivotal for this. A little bit more in the US, with 80% of sales happening in store. Obviously in Europe, it's about 70% with a larger e-commerce market, but it's still incredibly important to make sure that you're understanding the omni-channel impact. So you can do a top-down measurement approach, or you can do a bottom-up measurement approach. And what we'll talk about today is the differing testing frameworks, the different technologies, and also the limitations within measurement that we're trying to tackle at the IAB. So what are the metrics that matter? When we got together with a group of retailers, brands, agencies, not just within the US, but we're doing this from a global perspective, we wanted to understand and be aware that there's already metrics that retailers are using that have been used in the digital out-of-home ecosystem for decades, and we didn't want to reinvent the wheel because we think that's a lot of what the tensions we're seeing on-site, I would say just online retail media, this reinvention of online metrics that already exist. So we looked at how we're going to define in-store traffic, conversion, unique visitors, dwell time, visual engagement, ad impression, audience segmentation, sales attribution, and brand lift. And we did all of this while also ensuring that we're prioritizing consumer privacy. Yes, there's a lot of really advanced technologies that can track the consumer in the store, but as we look at consumer privacy and we look at measurements, especially in the store, we need to look at not just, there's different types of consent. We want to make sure that we're also understanding implied consent of a consumer going in the store and the implied consent they're giving a retailer and how their data can be used. And this will allow us to leverage various advanced technologies such as real-time data analytics, machine learning, AI-powered segmentation, and interactive displays, all of which are being used today to really advance the capabilities of in-store. Brands do know and understand the value of in-store. However, brands, given the tensions of measurement from the last, say, 3 to 5 years in retail media, they're demanding that as they invest in store, a lot of these measurement capabilities are already resolved, and there's integration with the retailers and the technology partners they're working with. And this will allow us to test different opportunities, such as visual sensors, shopping cart and baskets, beacons and Bluetooth, passive Wi-Fi, smart screens in the aisles, interactive kiosk, and audio programming, all of which retailers and brands are looking to test in store. However, as we look at the different capabilities in store, we want to make sure that we can have a testing framework to know, did it work? Am I getting incremental value of it? And is it improving the consumer experience? All of which are 3 questions you need to ask as you develop a testing framework. So we'll begin with A/B testing. So this is pretty standard. A/B testing, also known as split testing, involves comparing 2 versions of a media element to see which one performs better on a specific metric, such as sales uplift, consumer engagement, or dwell time. So here we can do this. We can test the effectiveness of digital signage contest by testing the effectiveness of 2 different ad creatives on identical screens in similar store locations to determine which ones generate more attention. You can do it within an end cap display by comparing the performance of different product arrangements or promotional messaging on end cap displays or shelf planograms to assess which configuration attracts more consumers. The objective of any A/B test is ensuring that you are accounting for any variables. So it's important that you, again, work with your retail partners, work with your merchant partners to understand any baseline performance difference in the environment and minimize data bias. Multivariate testing, here you can look at multiple variables simultaneously to identify the best combination of optimal outcomes, offering nuanced insights beyond just simple A/B testing. This is a little bit more advanced. Here you can test screen layouts, button placements, and content types to enhance consumer engagement. In our panel coming up, I'm actually really excited because we have Threefold or SMG and Co-op and Pepsi and Colgate Palmolive talking on how they're doing this sort of multivariate testing. You can also do shelf placement and lighting. You can also look at cross-channel and incremental lift, which would be incredibly important. Here, you're looking how you can combine in-store, on-site, and off-site media to test media effectiveness across the segments. If we say that 70% of sales happen in store, but 90% of the sales are impacted by digital advertising, then we need to make sure that we can have a unified omni-channel measurement approach. The other one that it's used a lot within the digital home ecosystem is the before and after analysis. And here you're comparing key metrics before, during, and after campaigns to really gauge its effectiveness. And it's crucial to consider specific timeframes, contexts, and any seasonal sales channel that can bring any data bias. Again, with all these 3 different testing frameworks, a lot of the ways in which you're minimizing data bias will be reliant on information that a merchant team can give you. So you want to make sure you're looking at look-back periods based on product seasonality and distribution history. You want to make sure you understand sales volume, category, new customers, ROI, also inventory levels. And again, when you're looking at control groups and you want to account for uncontrolled variables, such as I mentioned earlier, inventory levels, other brands having a promotion, specific spacing within the store, all of the things that can impact the accuracy and reliance on any analysis that you're doing. I would be remiss talking about digital home and in-store measurement without talking about the impression multiplier. At the IAB, we define the impression multiplier as a way to adjust ad play counts in one-to-many media formats to more accurately reflect the exposure of a shopper to an ad during its playtime. We recognize and we define exposure, and I know there's controversy here, as the ability to see an ad and for there to be prevalence of a consumer in that space, but we don't actually require proof of the consumer being in that space, just because that does bring a lot of privacy concerns. That's not saying retailers can't do that, but requiring the proof of an impression from a consumer in a specific location does bring privacy concerns that, some retailers might have higher or lower risk appetite for them. Overall, when we're looking at this, is we want to make sure that we're understanding the realistic estimate of reach, and we want to validate this obviously through third-party organizations that exist today. And this really ensures that all shoppers are not assumed to have the same probability of viewing and engaging an ad, and adjust for environmental variables and the shopper behaviors that affect ad visibility and engagement. So this is an example of a formula. So here you can look at hourly audience contacts at a screen. You can look at the ad exposure per dwell time, and then you look at, and that's divided by the ad slots per screen hour. So like, let's say you have 2,200 contacts, you had 3.8 ad views and 450 ad slots. Here you have an impression multiplier of 19.33. So that means average impressions per ad play on screen A between 7 to 7:59 a.m. on a Monday. Another example here is a person can enter the viewing corridor at any time during the ad play. And from the first second an ad plays right up to the last second the ad plays, the real-world model takes into account all possible ad play combinations a person could see from the moment they enter a viewing corridor. The idea that the person enters and they're viewing the ad from the beginning, it's not realistic. There are some technologies that will start playing the ad when a person comes, but there's multiple people in the aisle, so again, not realistic, and that's where ad impression multiplier helps us. The MRAC standard of 1 second for an ad to be deemed viewable, and the viewable of 1 is used as a minimum in view to an ad exposure calculation. So here, with the same example, we have the calculation of ad slot duration, screen dwell time, minus in-time viewing. And then here you look at the ad slot duration, and then you have an ad exposure per screen dwell time of 3.8. Again, this is just an example of a formula, but again, it's really important as you start looking at measurement to have conversations with the retailers and technology providers to understand the technologies they're using, the measurement frameworks they're using, and having alignment on those two. There are limitations in measurement, and it's important that we understand these limitations, not just from an impression multiplier, but across all different forms of measurement that happen in store and just in retail media in general. So one of the first ones is estimation or assumptions. Anything that's based on general observations may not capture unique consumer behaviors, leading to possible inaccuracies. There's obviously consumer behavior changes. They vary from time of day, season, events, which may not be accounted for, causing discrepancies in ad engagement and estimates. You want to make sure that you are understanding dynamic retail environments. There's changes in the store layout that may impact your product, even though your product was not changed within that store layout. There's also complexity and resource requirements, obviously, internally from the retailer, from the technology partner, and from the brand. And again, technology is amazing, but when we look at all these capabilities that retail media offers, it's not saying I want to do this specific technology. It's more of what problem am I trying to solve within the store, how am I going to measure, and how am I going to improve the consumer experience, and identifying the technology that will do that. And then finally, it's incredibly important that we have a privacy-first approach. Technologies used for data gathering must comply with privacy laws, with risk management, risk, and consumer trust. This is incredibly important as retailers go in store. There's a lot of retail data that's looking at biometric behavior, and it does create a lot of data risks, because if your partner is the one processing the data, or how the data is being processed, or identifying anything such as age, gender, or race, could have some privacy concerns for regulators depending on the country or state that you're in. However, on a more positive note to end this, and we'll go right into our panel after this, there's some measurement considerations we need to take into account. As I mentioned, we want to make sure that we have accuracy and we have reliable data. And again, this is why we need the use of measurement standards in retail media is really important, but also it's essential to calibrate sensors and validate data constantly. Nobody has a perfect model. If you're not consistently improving and validating your model will be wrong after a while. You want to make sure, again, you want to make sure that you're implementing identity-blind solutions that preserve privacy laws. And then you're also integrating sales data. How can you link engagement metrics with sales data to gauge the real impact to media campaigns? This is one of the things that brands are demanding for in-store. And then finally, I know it's a little bit of a contradiction, but we want to make sure that we're balancing the engagement of interaction of metrics. You can't just measure the quantity of impressions, but also what was the quality of the engagement that was happening, what were the interactions, what was the consumer behavior and experience, which I think is paramount when we think about the success of in-store retail media. That is all, and go right into the panel. I'm excited today. We can have everyone introduce themselves. We have pretty much all the experts. I'm really excited to dive into this.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Kate Tutel. I'm Chief Strategy Officer at SMG.
Hi everyone, Dean Harris, Head of Co-op Media Network.
Hi, I'm Ana Maria Guerra, and I am the Retail Media and E-commerce Marketing Manager for Europe for Colgate-Palmolive.
So when we think about in-store measurement, one of the things that I really want to make sure that we touch on is not just the capabilities of measurement, but also kind of like what is the measurement framework? How should you be testing the different technologies? But before we go into that, we'd love if you could kind of give us a glimpse of like, what is the in-store opportunity and how should both retailers, given that you kind of sit on both sides, how should retailers and brands be approaching it?
Yeah, sure. So I guess the first thing is to say there's probably a lot of kind of talk in the industry that retail media is digital only, but actually the reality is that's not true. Retail media has been based on in-store advertising for 20 plus years, and so it's a kind of fundamental part of the retail media mix for most advertisers. I think what we're seeing increasingly is a move to the digitization of the store, where retailers are investing in digital screens infrastructures, and that's brilliant for advertisers because it's giving them opportunities to serve more interesting creative, it's building upon compliance, it's creating a whole range of formats to activate on as well, which is amazing. And I think this year in the UK market, we'll start to see some proof of concept trials with some of the more interesting technologies in this space, so some of the sensor technologies where you can capture more interesting and detailed data as well. I think the thing probably though for us all to bear in mind is in-store will still have a lot of static traditional advertising at its core, and that stuff is really effective, and so we shouldn't forget about that at the kind of expense sometimes of the shinier, newer, more emerging capabilities. And so I guess as we're thinking about how to measure success of these types of campaigns, we need to make sure that we have one consistent way of doing that, so we're kind of comparing apples for apples in all of our campaigns.
Yeah, the evolving landscape of the store is something we keep a close eye on at Co-op. 95% of our sales are still through the physical store, and convenience is a high footfall industry. So we're seeing probably a change across use cases, the tech obviously, and measurement, which we'll touch on in more detail. But in use cases, we're seeing the store is being used by above the line budgets more, as well as below the line. You'll see it supermarkets as we walk in through their doors now. You'll see words like Clear Channel and JC&Co at the bottom of the screens, and that's a sort of change in perspective of media buyers looking at stores in terms of eyeballs as well as the till sales. And then on the tech front, there's lots of amazing stuff with cameras and sensors that are really adding to the understanding of the effectiveness, and then things like interactive formats for grabbing the attention of consumers. I mean, I don't think any shopper's going to stand in front of a screen and watch a movie, but subtle motion will help grab the attention. And then, yeah, on measurement, if you compare digitization to, say, cardboard and plastic, you're able to optimize a campaign more than you will. You can't do much with a poster if you know it's performing really well, but screens you can. So yeah, the use cases, the tech, and that understanding and optimization of the trends that we're seeing at Co-op.
And I guess as a brand as well, I think the evolution of online and trying to also bring those measurements to the in-store, but then how shoppers, even we heard it in the morning, how shoppers are mostly omni-channel, and if they're in the store, they're not only looking at the screens, but they're also looking at their phones and then searching on other websites, and it's very omni-channel. So I guess what we're looking for as also this brand is how do we ensure that that rounded experience is across all channels, in-store, online, and offline. And if they see the same product online, they see it in a digital screen. And I think the value of this kind of session as well is understanding measurement. As you've heard in the morning, as a CPG, we want measurement. We have so many different media channels across that we can use and we're used to using, but we actually want to leverage this quality of data because you're having shoppers that are like in that mindset. You have them for, I don't know, a couple more minutes than you would have just in an Instagram. So it's also like leveraging this type of format to actually reach them in a non-disruptive way as well.
I love that, how you kind of, bring up the point that the consumer is not just in store, they're living all their digital shelves at the same time. Would love to kind of have you dive in a little bit more on how, you as Colgate, or how you would recommend for a brand to successfully implement that physical and mental ability, like capabilities of the consumer, and how are you balancing both the physical ad experience, but also the mental kind of attention the consumer is giving the ad?
Yes, so I think the mental availability part starts even pre-store. So it's how we reach our customers in a consistent way, building that emotional resonance, and also building those memory links so that when they get to the store, they can actually interact and like have the brand in the mindset, and they can know if they're trying to buy a toothpaste, which brand they want to buy in more occasions and more consumers. So I guess building mental availability pre-store helps when you're going to the store. The different type of touch points that we use needs to have an objective as well. Like, as you were saying, in the store, you have a massive reach. So what's our brand objective? Are we building mental availability just in brand awareness, or are we trying to just ensure that we're driving more sales? It's understanding our objectives, but overall being consistent to continue building those memory links. And in the physical availability is a huge component in it, because in the store you have so many products on the shelf. If you're buying a toothpaste, I don't know if you know which toothpaste to buy. Sometimes it's a bit overwhelming. So understanding that as a shopper you might have just a certain range that you will notice and certain brands that you will notice. So ensuring your product is available, ensuring you have the right stock is available, and then being in the right positions of the store. You have some areas that are more fluent than the others. So understanding, depending on the brand's objective, where do you want to be and how can you ensure that you are where the shopper are making the decision about buying your toothpaste, a toothbrush, or any other category.
Okay, great. I guess the only thing I would say to kind of build on that is, I think what's exciting is that there's kind of an increasing recognition that retail media can do both jobs, which is great. So I think probably historically retail media was thought of as a tool that drove physical availability, because as you said, you can have secondary space, you can have in-store demos and all of these types of things, but actually retail media can build mental availability too, and actually in a very cost-effective way. So I think there's a lot to talk about, things like comparing the reach of supermarkets to big TV shows and stuff like that. But if you even just think of a Co-op store estate, you've got 2,500 stores, members are going in there 1.5 times a week. That is a phenomenal audience to reach, and with comparatively low CPMs to a lot of digital media as well. So actually you can use in-store media to drive and build mental availability really, really effectively and cheaply relative to other media touch points as well.
I love that, and I guess when you have that balancing, we'd love to kind of hear, like, as you think about how to balance disruption with the consumer experience, how are you managing the perception the in-store effectiveness is challenging to measure? And can you share examples of how your organization has utilized A/B testing or any sort of testing frameworks to really measure both the impact of short-term sales and also kind of the long-term impact in store?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think there's a perception in the market that methodologies have to be complex to be sophisticated. And A/B testing has been around for ages in digital media, and there's no reason it can't be moved into the physical domain. The key is in the planning and setup, and then in the evaluation time that for instance, you mentioned the immediate sales impact and a longer tail. Where do you draw the line? So with the first bit on the digital versus physical, my career started in email marketing, and it was a simple change of, is the buy now button blue or green? And you could evaluate it. The only difference is the sample size, going between, being able to siphon off 100,000 people against 900,000 in stores. There aren't as many. But the methodology can be the same. But as I mentioned, it all comes back to setup. So when you're sat down with a brand, it's very rare that you'll say put media in every single store to an equal extent. You'll pick the certain amount of stores where you think they'll have the greatest uplift. And it's in that process that you decide how you create a representation of a test and control group, and making sure you account for diverse store formats and demographics in the local area is the tricky bit, but it can still be done. And Co-op's been doing it for near a decade now. And then at the end, purchase cycles and that short term and long term, it's tricky. I know other retail media networks change the post-campaign duration dependent on if it's whiskey or if it's Coke. They should be bought in different frequencies for most people. At Co-op, we have a choice. You can either have a complete evaluation or you can have an informative one or an indicative one. And brands often want indicative results so they can plan quickly and not wait 3 months to find out if something worked. So we draw the line around 3 weeks after a campaign. We do that consistently, and we're in collaboration with brands to make sure they're happy. That's where we draw the line. With email marketing, you could carry on for weeks and weeks and weeks and capture some more sales, but at some point in time, you've got to say, is this signal enough of success through testing? And yeah, that approach of digital to physical setup and carefully choosing your duration is what we do.
And I guess to add to that, I think it always makes me smile when people say that in-store is kind of difficult to measure. The reality is it isn't difficult to measure. This is the kind of thing I get told off for saying by our head of insight, but the methodology is relatively simple. You put media in some stores and you compare it to other stores that didn't have media, and you just need to set up the control groups to make that a kind of robust piece of analysis. And actually, to Dean's point, the benefit of that is that you can scale that type of analysis very, very quickly, so you can learn very fast and you can begin to optimize your campaigns and the choices that you're making really quickly. So that type of analysis means that you can actually answer questions like, is that type of media appropriate for driving a short-term sales uplift? Does touch point A work better than touch point B? The types of questions that actually are really actionable and that you can change very quickly off the next campaign. So I think we've measured 15,000 studies on in-store activations over the last few years. So it is absolutely possible to do, and the benefit is you can do it quickly and scale it.
That's a lot.
It's a lot.
15,000. I love kind of like, there's advanced technologies and everything, but I think it's really important to have, static display ads work, measurement can be simple, we don't have to overcomplicate it, and kind of thinking within that same, would love to maybe, Dean, to kind of nerd out a bit and kind of like, within that setting up the measurement framework to compare the effectiveness of different media, what are the challenges you're faced in as a retailer, but also what are challenges that brands are kind of coming with that you're helping them resolve?
Yeah, it's a good question, because we have, I think, 70, 80 plus channels that you can execute with, formats you can execute with. A lot of those are in store because that's where our sales are. And as any media planner will tell you, the cocktail matters. Each format, each channel doesn't work independently. 2 add 2 equals 5 sometimes. So you need to understand the independent contribution and the combined contribution, and that's complicated. And that's made even more challenging because you've got the variables that you put in yourself, which is lots of different channels all at the same time. But then you've got things like weather, seasonality, category, even sporting events might change things. If it's sunny in London but raining in Manchester, which is usually the case, how do you account for that in your measurement criteria. And sample and scale matters. And I know we talk about scale is the ticket to the game in retail media for audience size. It's also for measurement. The more scale you have, the more robust you can be in your measurement, because you've got more comparisons across your estate. You've got more ways to iron out some of those external influences. So that's really important. And then lastly is innovate in your media products is a focus, and that gets the headline, but innovate in your measurement capabilities and having a roadmap there is really important. And there should never be a settle. You should always have conversations with your brand. Where can we do better? Where do we need to dig deeper? How do we present back the results to you? And it needs to be an ongoing conversation. We're quite lucky at Co-op because we have partners that invest in those capabilities for us. SMG with their Plan Apps tool, which we've been using for 8 years, 9 years now. And we also work with Sakana as well. So we have partners that invest in making sure measurement and capabilities are state of the art for us. So yeah.
That's great. And I would kind of love to hear kind of the challenges that you're facing as a brand.
I guess as a brand, you think very omni-channel, and you think of how retail media and the in-store will play in my overall media mix, because at the end it's just the same brand across everything. So understanding, like we always start in our measurement framework, understanding what's our objective, because depending if we're trying to drive brand awareness or if we're trying to just to increase sales and go more lower funnel, the success and the measurement will differ. So if we're trying to drive brand awareness and measuring just in sales, and the other way, we won't get to the actual results, or we might be thinking that maybe that campaign didn't work, but it actually did. So I guess once you have clarity on your objective, then it's kind of executing and partnering with retailers and their media agencies as well to kind of reach your objective. I guess one of the challenges today is I think as brands, we always want more data and we want more clarity, because we know there's a lot of information there, but we just haven't felt like everything's all together. Because I think retailers get data from your loyalty cards, from your sales, from the interactions now with the in-store. You have so many different kind of like Bluetooth and beacons and everything that to capture different data. So when we bring everything all together, that's where you're gonna start seeing like the full measurement. Because at this point, we know what's working, what's not, how to optimize, but then we keep thinking like, what is next? Like, how can we continue optimizing? How can we start moving, if we are thinking of moving budget from the traditional media to here, how do we start bringing more results back to the business to kind of start building that case?
All right, I love that. And Katie, just impromptu question, but you kind of sit in the middle of both sides, and kind of to what Anna was saying, that, you know, there is that, you know, I want to understand how my full media mix, like, what would you say to both kind of retailers and brands kind of sitting on?
I mean, I think we're seeing huge moves and developments in capability in that space actually too, and it's kind of still early, particularly in the UK, but I think it's happening. So obviously we can now start using loyalty data to really understand the omni-channel effects of a campaign, and we can use that data also to determine incrementality, which is obviously the answer that everyone wants. Is like, I could give you a post-campaign report that says I've got you an 80-to-1 ROI, but if all of those people were going to buy anyway, it's kind of an irrelevant piece of analysis. So we need to be able to demonstrate incrementality, and that is possible using loyalty data. It's just that is complex analysis, and it takes time, and it's difficult for retailers to scale that analysis because it often needs to be done by pretty specialist resource. But I think we'll see massive movements on that this year, which I think is brilliant, and I think we're starting to see that we can answer those questions for brands, and interestingly the results are very positive, so I'm excited about that.
That's perfect. You solved their problems. I would love to kind of dive into, you know, how you recommend for brand or retailer to identify, like, how are you identifying the store formats and the zones? How are you balancing that? You know, as you mentioned earlier, that sometimes 2 + 2 is equal to 5. What is the methodology in this measurement framework to ensure that you have actionable and accurate results?
Yeah. I mean, again, you can kind of do it the same way as before. You can A/B test all of this stuff and get the answers. So you know, if you think of an average in-store campaign, it might be activated across multiple formats or touch points. You basically need to understand the spread of those touch points across where you've activated. So some stores you might have one touch point, some you might have two, some you might have secondary space, some you don't have secondary space, and you kind of need to lay that all out and understand it. And then you can kind of contrate the control groups against all those different subsets. And you know that's challenging because sometimes you end up with really small sample sizes, but it is possible. And so then you can start saying, actually, if I activate media with my secondary space, do I get a better result? If I activate 3 touch points per store, is that a good way to invest, or actually am I just diminishing the return that I'm getting? So that is absolutely possible to do. We've got tons and tons of data on that as well. And so that means that you can start being a little bit more sophisticated in how you activate. So it's not just, I've bought 100 stores of media. Actually, I've put that media in effective stores. I've combined that with digital in the right places, and I've got the right number of touch points to make it all work. So we, again, have got tons of data that's starting to answer some of those questions, which is great.
That's awesome.
Yes, I guess it's about testing and learning. I think we're on a journey trying to explore. Also, each retailer has its own way of measuring things. So as a brand, you have to learn how it works here, then learn how it works here, how it works here. So I guess standardization, so thank you for the IAB for that. That will be amazing, because as a brand, you're trying to see like where, for example, if we're trying to drive certain whitening products that are more premium, you need to understand which retailers, which formats, which ad types, where in the store you need to look for them, because it's not the same as just buying a normal toothpaste, but it's a more premium product. So it's depending on our objectives and what we're trying to get is where you start testing and learning and understanding which zones are more affluent, or which ones are people tend to interact more, or maybe it's closer to the aisle because we're trying to drive more impulse. So I think once you have clarity on your objectives, you lean on with your partners to ensure that you keep testing and learning, and then you build that kind of knowledge hub and then start building from there. So understanding this two actually work together for this category and this two work better for this. How do you maximize them there and start learning as the technology continues developing?
And I guess, you know, as you kind of do what you're saying, understanding how each thing is impacting everything, not to throw another metric into the mix, but Dean, you know, how are you thinking about the halo analysis, kind of to what you said in the beginning? Like, what is the overall impact, not just of in-store, but online? And what additional insights can brands leverage? And how do you think this should be influencing advertising strategies?
Yeah, at Co-op, we believe halo analysis will be ramped and dialed up in the market for probably three reasons. One is as retailers start putting a lot of CapEx equipment into their stores, they'll want them to be utilized. And to do that, you need to show stronger benefits. We're moving from this era of promise to performance that's mentioned. So there's going to be greater pressure on ROIs and finding halo benefit to investments in retail media. And then lastly is this idea of retailers acting like media owners properly. There's still that anchor to a retailer, and shifting into that media owner where you potentially are responsible for driving sales anywhere, period. You know, you're less concerned of where the stores are, like, and do ITV care where a Kit Kat's bought? Does a retail media network need to act in the same way? So when you think about halo, there's your featured SKU usually in a campaign. So you'll look at the sales uplift of that, and then the halo on the brand indirectly. And you usually see movement in that. And then there's the halo on the category. At Co-op, we're looking into a fourth halo, which is on store or retailer, which is important in a convenience perspective, because we're usually a second choice. You do your big shop somewhere else, you come to us after. A Co-op shopper typically shops everywhere else in the market. So we wanted to understand if there was a halo benefit to, if you advertised in a Co-op shop, you might not buy it in our store, but you might then buy it from another retailer. Now that's acting like a proper media owner, and our MD of food might not like that approach, but as a media owner, you should be able to justify it. So we worked with Sakana, I keep doing that, sorry. We worked with Sakana, who have got market data, so they've got all the retailers' data, so we wanted to do a proof of concept, which was around taking 3 big in-store campaigns across 3 different categories and seeing if they did drive sales in our rival stores. And the results were really promising. And I'll have to stop there before my PR team kills me, because we are planning to package it up. But I think this has quite serious implications on retail media, because it proves that in-store media will drive sales beyond the 10 minutes. And it might drive sales in the next 10 days or in the next 10 weeks. And it might hold mental availability beyond that trip. And that's probably going to be something that will really help justify more investment into the channel. So yeah, halo analysis, I think, will be quite a significant thing for retailers to consider.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to see retailers behaving as media owners, which I think is a real kind of shift versus a few years ago. I don't think I could have imagined sitting alongside a retailer who was going to say that. But I think it's really exciting, and I think it's really interesting for brands, because I think these are some of the questions that advertisers have been asking for a really long time, which we're starting to see answers to. And I think it's good to see retail media being treated with the same level of kind of discipline and rigor when it comes to measurement and answering some of those questions. So I think it's exciting.
And I guess kind of to your point, and closing out, like looking forward into the future, how do you plan to leverage the insights gathered from past campaigns, and how should you, both as a retailer and a brand and an agency, and how can you ensure that there's collaboration between the merchant teams and the media teams to ensure that not just that the budget's coming in, but you're telling the cohesive story on that measurement? Anna, you can go, and then Dean, and then Katie.
Okay.
Yep.
Retail media actually is a very promising channel, and we are everyone on our journey, and we will get there once we start having those closed loop measurements and standardization across different retailers. I think in the future, just thinking that you can actually see the retail media as an established media channel where you can actually have it up front in your media planning, I think it's very interesting and very exciting, and also partnering with agencies and retailers, because I think we cannot do it alone, and there's a value exchange between us. And I think, as in the morning, I heard that CPGs are excited and wants to get into it. They see the value of it. It's just about how do we make sure we're partnering together, like you're trying to test things, how we can be part of the test, because we're also testing, we're all trying to learn what this new kind of channel or infrastructure can actually help us accomplish. So it's just about partnering and working together.
Yeah, I'd agree with all that. And we're in a data-driven, performance-focused industry, but one where brands are relatively demanding clients. But because there's 2 things that usually happen is, one is you want a consistently improving performance of your core investments, but you also want new and shiny innovation being brought in as well. And there's a few things that help a retailer do that. One is brands' budgets tend to be structured in a way where 70%, the percentages might move around, but 70% might focus on the stuff that you know works. And then 10% might be on the roll the dice stuff, where there isn't that much historical evidence, your new formats. And then the 20% is the 10% that works. You start scaling it up and experimenting it before you move it into your core. So that budget structure aids optimization and innovation at the same time, and retailers have got incentives to do both well. I think the second, which is something that the UK market is really fortunate to have, and Co-op as well, because of the amount of sales and where our media focus is historical data. So the USA market, for instance, that's getting into in-store advertising hasn't seen that many combinations of format, category, seasonality, campaign objective, whereas the UK, we've got thousands and thousands of data points. Like, we've been doing this, shopper media in stores for over a decade at Co-op, and that will help us plan better. We've done 3 Olympics, 3 World Cups, Euros, covered snow in February, people buying umbrellas in May. So we've got loads of past data to help plan those future campaigns that will help that optimization carry on. And then the last one is the collaboration point that you mentioned. So I think that there is a gap between brand and shopper budgets, and we're hearing about the impacts that's having on how effective you can be in retail media. I was at a UK media agency that was saying our brand cannot tell us where the retail media activity is in shops. If we knew that, we'd move some of our investment around to capitalise on it or make our above-the-line media work harder. And in the absence of brands restructuring themselves, because there are separate teams in most of the time, the pressure will come on being more transparent with data and analytics and having more conversations, to be blunt. And I think the pressure will come on the retail media network side to pick up a lot of that slack, which we will do because it's in our interest to do. So I think there's, the budget structures, the historical evidence, and that keenness to collaborate in the absence of these disparate teams is something that will help.
Yeah, and I think probably the only thing to add to that from my side is I think there's probably two things that we'll need to do next. One is work out what data is useful and what data isn't. And I think that's an interesting one because I think when we work with a lot of brands, they will ask for more data, and that's what often the kind of business is asking for. Retailers have so much data, it's trying to kind of sift through it all and say, actually, which of this data should we make available and which bits of this data are useful? And I think if we can answer those questions, that will be a big step forward. I think the second one is we need to meet the brands where they are. So there's a whole load of different maturity levels from advertisers in terms of how long they've invested in retail media capabilities, again, how they look at retail media performance in their business, and it's definitely not a one-size-fits-all approach. So we need really sophisticated solutions for some of the big FMCGs who've been doing this for 20 years and who want to answer some of those really challenging questions. But there are other brands who are very much starting out on their journey, investing for the first time, who've run 3 campaigns. The reality is they don't need a loyalty-based omni-channel incrementality analysis. They need to know some real fundamentals about what's working and what's not so they can activate better in year. So we need to make both types of solutions available to those brands based on their needs. So yeah, meet the brands where they are and figure out which data is useful and what's not.
I love that. It's all about the right data, not all the data. I think we have time for...
We have a wee bit of time for questions. Perfect. If anybody has any questions that they'd like to ask the panel. I've got one actually at the start. You've touched on this about what brands find relevant. I was wondering if maybe all of you could talk about the shift that you're seeing, if you're seeing a shift, if you imagine a shift between the way marketing campaigns will be planned moving forward to incorporate retail media. Is it going to be for just product launch? Will it be seasonal? Are you seeing that shift already? Are budgets being allocated for a year rather than a season, for example?
I think that's hugely variable by brand again. So I think what we're seeing is, again, some of the kind of larger CPGs are kind of completely restructuring themselves and the way that they plan these campaigns. So I think, some of the big FMCGs now have retail media divisions within their business that they are kind of creating in order to stitch some of these kind of disparate functions together. They're planning definitely on an annual basis. They're optimizing themselves within the kind of campaigns. Then you've got other brands who this is still very much part of the trading realities on a kind of ad hoc basis. So I think that's hugely variable, dependent on the brand and how well developed they are. What I would say is that we are seeing definitely a trend to evaluating retail media performance more consistently and a real ask for that. There's a lot of pressure and scrutinization on retail media budgets as they grow, which I think is good. That's good for everyone. Like, we need to be making sure the campaigns that we're running are working. And we're also starting, I think, to see more brands move to long-term planning if they can make that data available and if retail media networks can give them the visibility.
Yeah, you touched on marketing plan, and some of the things that we're hearing from brands and media agencies is around this simplistic plan on a page that the media industry's got to with all of the channels. And you might have a slide deck that goes to a brand, and you lay down for every single channel will be 1 slide, and then your retail media activity will be 7 slides. And that's the thing I think that needs to change, is how do you incorporate retail media into that one plan on a page? And that's sometimes the way it's the metrics that planned against it. So most other channels are CPM, retail media sometimes isn't. So I think this evolving the industry so that retail media can easily fit into the rest of a brand's portfolio is going to help.
And I guess from a brand perspective, I do see a shift of integration. I think as we start educating internally as well, the role of retail media in our overall media planning, that's when we're gonna start seeing the actual integration. Because at the end, we don't wanna start planning our overall media planning and then planning retail media, because the shopper is one, it's not one channel. So it has to make sense so that it's not disruptive, but it makes sense overall. So I do see a shift, brands either aligning internally in the planning, so probably you'll start seeing more annual planning, more reaching out to your retailer and saying like, this is what we want to have because it matches with what we're doing overall. But at the same time is also understanding how do we continue testing and learning, because I guess retail media, you have both sides as well. You have always on, so it's like more your tactical way of activating, but then you have also your innovations, your launches. So it's also how do you combine both in order to adapt to seasonalities, to contextual, like in the store, if it's raining, it's not, understanding how everything comes together in this kind of very exciting journey.
Do we have any other questions?
Hi, Dean touched on the fact that there was an effect outside the co-op in other stores that you measured, and you have to think like a media owner. And I wondered, taking that thought further, have you given any thought to how you might measure non-endemic sales? Because obviously that captures Colgate and Cadbury's, but Sky recently did a partnership with Waitrose, for example, and it could be there were non-endemic brands that would be interested in tracking and would commit more spend if you could measure it.
Yeah, so obviously endemic is relatively straightforward because you've got the till, and companies like Sakana have everyone's tills. And non-endemic, you don't have the till. So what you need to make sure is you're effectively communicating exposure data. So who's seen it, when did they see it, what channels, and then the measurement is a collaboration really, because the non-endemics are the ones with their tills, whether they're online or elsewhere. So yeah, that's a different approach, but it's still a collaboration, and it's the eyeballs and the behavioral targeting that's of interest to non-endemics really. But yeah, the methodology is very different.
Hi, my question is for Anna. As a brand, how many RMNs do you work with? Because Quentin mentioned there are about 30 plus in Europe, and it would be hard to work with all the 30. So how many do you work with, and what makes one RMN better than the other that makes you invest more with them?
You mean RM, like retail media networks?
Media network. Yeah.
So each country is very different. Each country has its top players. I won't lie, normally we go with the retailers that actually have enough measurement to give us, because at the end as a brand, we have limited money and we need to bring back measurement and results. So normally, wherever we see a retailer that it's looking to partner with us and can we drive that collaboration and measurement, that's where we start planning and working with them. But that doesn't mean that if a retailer is on their journey, we won't work with them. It's just we work in a different way, because everyone's on a journey, and as a brand, there's also certain journeys that we need to go through. So first, how we can start working with you more organically, what can we build that experience as a brand, and then we can start thinking of maybe it's just visibility, then it's visibility plus brand awareness, and then you start playing the different levers as the retailers go on a journey. I would say you will see simplification as well, because since there's so many retail media networks appearing in the different landscapes across Europe, we have a limited budget. So it's also understanding where do we get the most out of our money, but also where are we driving more value as well as a brand in the long term or in the short term.
Hi, really good panel. Thank you very much. One question for you, Anna. Internally, how are you comparing the measurement of retail media versus traditional brand media? And at what point does that comparison happen? And are you seeing switch of funding as a result?
So that's why we're looking for standardization. And I think the measurements today, even if you compare within retail media networks, they're very different. Maybe their attribution windows, the way they calculate things are very different. So overall, what we're trying to see is like how can we start at least understanding how each of them are measuring or calculating the different standard KPIs like ROAS, like those standards that you would see in other ones as well. And then understanding, okay, how can this be comparable? But today I would say we're trying to also integrate it to our MMMs and understand what's the retail media impact in our overall media strategy. But without the granularity and real-time data, it's very hard to start putting retail media data in this kind of complex studies. So overall, I would say it's a very manual work that we're doing today, trying to understand the different measurements, how do they compare within each other, and then actually our CPMs are cheaper, but are we reaching the same people? Like trying to understand manually how can we work with the levers we have and compare with them. And when does it happen? I guess that's one of the shifts that we were mentioning. As we start aligning much more our planning and we think omni-channel, we will be thinking of when we plan our Meta, our other channels, is how do we plan also retail media? And that's where you start bringing your benchmarks in cost per clicks or CPMs and understanding where the attribution, where the investment will be best placed.
Yeah, and to that point, actually adding on, Claire O'Brien from ISBAR, we just published with the industry the responsible retail media framework, which some people here might not know about. But to your point, Jeffrey, in the work that's going on with IAB Europe, those standards, which are exactly what you were talking about, Anna, have been laid out. They're not there as a rule, but they are there as a direction of travel. And IAB Europe has picked them up and adopted them, and the World Federation of Advertisers likewise. So we're hoping to kind of streamline the ask to get that kind of equivalency that media buyers need. And hopefully retail media shopper trade marketers, shopper marketers are also going to be wanting to acquire.
From a brand perspective as well as a retailer perspective, what does success look like for you when employing a retail media network?
Depends which C-suite you're speaking to. So a CFO might have a different view to the CMO. But yeah, the elephant in the room out in the open is that this is a sustainable way to run a grocery business. At Co-op, we're not on the stock market. We don't have hedge funds or pension funds owning us. The 5 million loyalty card holders are the owners of the business. So if we can drive a successful retail media business, it'll help us be more competitive in those markets and make those products better for our members. So that's probably a Co-op only perspective there. From a retail media, we work hand in hand with the brands, but the shopper's at the forefront. The shopper has to win, otherwise the behaviour doesn't change, and if the behaviour doesn't change, the sales don't go up, and if the sales don't go up, the brand's not happy, and if the brand's not happy, they won't work with the retail media network. So the focus needs to remain on making sure those shoppers keep shopping and their experience is optimised, and that's one of the reasons grocers are investing in loyalty programs. It's one of the reasons they're investing in their experience and their products, is this ecosystem of media, commerce and ads. But yeah, so they've got a CFO, a Co-op view and a retail media network view there.
Yeah, I was going to say the only other thing I'd add is you've kind of got two choices, a retail media network. You can sell media or you can sell campaigns that work. One is going to give you a massive amount of income in the short term. One's going to become a sustainable income and profit source for the next decade. So you've kind of got two choices about how you play it. The sustainable choice is the second one. So if we put effectiveness at the heart of all retail media networks, that's how they're going to grow and sustain the hype from the sector.
And I guess, at least in an ideal world, it would be that we could actually activate in real time, get the data, understand, optimize, and continue building that and bring into the business, and saying at the same time we're bringing the other media channels, bringing the retail media measurement results as well, and saying this is a competitive channel we're making it very omni-channel. How can we actually start shifting budgets until when we get to that point of closed-loop measurement and real-time granular data? I think you'll start seeing the big shifts from one side to the other.
Hi, thanks very much for the panel. This is really enlightening. I've got a couple of questions, and I know I'm just before the coffee, so I'll make this quite brief, but I'll go for a twofer. I think, Katie, you talked about incrementality. Can the panel expand on attribution of sales and attributing those to the impact and the effects of the retail media network? That's the first part of it.
Yeah.
Second part is, I'm sure Jeffrey will probably disagree with this, but I always think the other end of the telescope of measurement is predictive analytics. So where are you at in terms of being able to predict sales impact that comes from the retail media network activities?
Yeah, so I guess with the question of incrementality from an in-store analysis perspective, because we're A/B testing, we're demonstrating incrementality, right? So we're comparing stores that have the media to stores without, and the way that we're making that comparison a fair comparison is by selecting stores that behave incredibly similarly prior to that campaign going live. So it means that you're stripping out the effects of store format, ranging differences, pricing, promotion, secondary space through that store matching process. So actually by doing that, we can say, as a consequence of that media happening in that store, I generated an incremental uplift, and we can isolate that as a variable, which we've done now multiple times over, which is allowing us to build up a really clear picture of how that works. In terms of then using that to give a predictive view on performance, for example, within our business, we have a tool that does allow us to start doing that. So because we've run tens and tens of thousands of pieces of analysis on this, we can start to understand really clear trends. So we can say, actually, do you know what? As a small brand with low base sales in X category, activating across these types of touch points, you can probably expect to get an uplift in a range of between X and Y, and we can quantify what that impact is likely to look like, which means as a brand, you're no longer having to guess. You can start saying, actually, do you know what, if I do activate across these 3 different touch points, I can feel really confident that I am going to get a return on investment and I can optimize towards it. So I think it's all about building up this huge database across multiple channels, types of brands. I think we've measured over 2,000 different FMCGs over the last few years with these types of campaigns. So we actually can use that now in a predictive way, which I think is really exciting and reassuring for brands who historically have had to bet some of their advertising budget on this. You don't have to bet anymore. Actually, you're planning against great data, which is very helpful.
And I mean, I agree with you, and I think predictive analytics is going to be significant as we move into it. You know, when Anna said that she wanted real-time data is, especially in certain environments, very difficult. But to your point, having leading or lagging indicators that can predict future measurement will be important, especially as cookie deprecation and privacy legislation will have you having to move more to a probabilistic. And how can you use deterministic data to make probabilistic assumptions to what you were saying, and then ensuring that those probabilistic assumptions are statistically significant, so that brands can optimize effectively is important.
Yeah, and just to add on the incrementality point, it can be a word that's a bit misunderstood. Like sometimes we'll say, a brand A will go, you've told me that my sales have grown by £1 million, but you've not ordered £1 million worth of extra stuff from me. So those two numbers don't add up because you're a supplier and a client at the same time. And I think incrementality can do 2 jobs. It can protect sales and it can grow sales, and it's the protecting sales that sometimes gets left out. And if you did no activity, your base sales aren't going to stay consistent. So there's a protect and grow element to incrementality. But to Katie's point, we can evidence that in the absence of that media, you would not have seen those sales. But it doesn't necessarily mean it will grow your brand sales in its entirety, because some is protect. And then predictive is all on your base data. So if you've been in store like Co-op has for years and years, you'll be more confident. If it's a new channel for you as a retail media network, you'll probably have to use market benchmarks, even ask your brand what they are seeing and what they expect. So it all comes down to what data you've got in the bank, and the tool Katie referenced, Plan Apps, has a lot of data in the bank.
All right.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks.
Thanks.